Nicolas Cage's much-anticipated appearance on Good Morning America was supposed to be a lively discussion about his upcoming psychological thriller, with maybe a few eccentric anecdotes thrown in for the audience's amusement. First, exactly what viewers got: Cage, in his signature animated style, recounted a bizarre story about preparing for his role by spending a night alone in a derelict theater, earning laughs from both the crew and the audience. George Stephanopoulos smiled politely and played along, but after a few minutes he pivoted the conversation toward Cage's off-screen life. He brought up the actor's past financial troubles, his string of unconventional roles, and even a few infamous tabloid headlines, framing them as real-life plot twists that mirrored the characters Cage played. Cage's smile froze. I thought we were here to talk about the film," he said, his tone measured but edged with steel. George tried to soften the segue, but pressed further, asking whether Cage thought his eccentric public image hurt or helped his career. The actor leaned forward and replied, "My work speaks louder than gossip. If you're looking for a confession, you've got the wrong man." The tension in the studio became palpable. When George began another question, referencing a years-old controversy, Cage calmly unclipped his mic, placed it on the coffee table, and stood. "This interview is over," he said, turning and walking off set without raising his voice. Control in his movements made the moment feel less like a meltdown and more like a deliberate scene from one of his films. Producers scrambled to cut to a commercial as George sat in silence. Shuffling his notes, the walk-off instantly became the headline of the day, dominating social media feeds with hashtags like #Cage, UNCAGED, and #cinema/circus trending within hours. Fans debated whether George had crossed the line or whether Cage had overreacted. Many sided with the actor, praising him for refusing to let the interview turn into what they saw as a thinly veiled ambush. Directors, co-stars, and film critics chimed in online, some pointing out that Cage had been fiercely protective of his privacy for decades and had every right to steer the conversation back to his work. By that afternoon, Good Morning America released a short statement describing the exchange as a lively discussion that took an unexpected turn. Avoiding any direct blame, Cage himself issued a brief but pointed comment through his publicist: "I came to speak about my craft. In my film, that remains my focus." He declined further interviews for the rest of the week, but surprised fans by making an unannounced appearance at a small independent theater screening of his new movie. There he mingled with the crowd, answered questions from fans, and spoke at length about his creative process, exactly the conversation he'd intended to have on national television. For many, the incident didn't tarnish his reputation. If anything, it enhanced it, reinforcing the image of Nicolas Cage as an actor who refuses to let someone else write his narrative. The walk-off wasn't a loss of control, it was a performance of control, one that kept the final frame firmly in his hands. In the days following Nicolas Cage's walk-off from Good Morning America, the incident dominated entertainment headlines and social media feeds. Clips of the moment were slowed down, zoomed in, and endlessly analyzed, viewers noting the subtle shift in his expression when George Stephanopoulos pivoted from discussing Cage's new film to dredging up his personal history. Fans described it as the exact second Cage decided the interview was over, praising his calm but definitive exit. Others argued that George's questions, while pointed, were fair game for a public figure with such a colorful past. Hashtags like #Cage UNCAGED, #cinema/circus, and #WalkLikeCage trended simultaneously, creating a digital tug-of-war over whether the moment was a masterclass in setting boundaries or an overreaction. Behind the scenes. Insiders revealed that Cage's team had submitted a clear set of topics for the segment, emphasizing that his personal controversies were off-limits and that the focus should remain on the film's creative process. When George pressed into forbidden territory, they claimed Cage's decision to leave was immediate and intentional. At a private screening in Los Angeles days later, Cage addressed the matter indirectly, telling the audience, "I've been acting long enough to know when a scene isn't working, and the fastest way to fix it is to call cut." remark drew applause and was quickly shared online, further cementing his departure as a purposeful act rather than a moment of temper. Even those who disagreed with the walk-off acknowledged that it fit perfectly with the persona Cage has cultivated over decades, principled, and unafraid to leave the stage when the script no longer serves him. Asterisk within a week of Nicolas Cage's walk-off from Good Morning America. The moment had already grown beyond a simple live TV mishap and become the centerpiece of a larger conversation about boundaries in celebrity interviews. Entertainment journalists, morning radio hosts, media ethics commentators dissected the exchange, some framing George Stephanopoulos' questions as legitimate journalistic probing, others as a calculated attempt to provoke a reaction. The footage of Cage's calm, deliberate exit, placing his mic on the table, delivering a brief parting line, and walking away without a glance back, was replayed endlessly, often with captions like "This is how you end a scene" or "Boundaries," starring Nicolas Cage. Memes paired the clip with famous lines from his movies, turning the walk-off into both a cultural statement and an internet joke. Asterisk Cage, true to form, didn't fan the flames directly. Instead, he made a handful of low-key appearances at independent film events, where his focus stayed firmly on his work. At one post-screening Q&A in New York, fan asked half-seriously if he'd ever go back to GMA. Cage smirked and replied, "Only if they let me write the script." The audience erupted in laughter, and that quip was instantly clipped, going viral across Twitter and TikTok. Meanwhile, Good Morning America seemed to take note, with subsequent celebrity interviews, leaning more heavily into project-focused questions and steering clear of sensitive personal history, unless guests volunteered it. By this point, the walk-off wasn't just gossip, it had become a mini pop culture parable about self-respect, control, and knowing when to exit the stage on your own terms. Asterisk by the fifth week after Nicolas Cage's walk-off from Good Morning America, the moment had shifted from a burst of online drama into a fully formed cultural reference point. The clip was still circulating, but now it appeared alongside commentary about creative boundaries, the ethics of interview prep, and the risks of chasing viral moments in live TV. In film circles, the incident became a kind of shorthand directors, actors, and critics referring to a Cage moment when describing a guest reclaiming control of an interview that had gone off course. Fans embraced it as a quiet act of defiance, highlighting how Cage didn't raise his voice, insult anyone, or turn the exchange into a spectacle. He simply decided the scene was over and left. On TikTok, the mic drop moment was remixed with quotes from his movies like, "I'm going to steal the Declaration of Independence and not the bees," cementing it in meme culture while still preserving its core message. Asterisk Cage himself never offered a blow-by-blow retelling, but his public appearances subtly reinforced the stance behind the walk-off. At a European film festival, he was asked about the importance of interview boundaries. Without mentioning GMA directly, he answered, "If you want a performance, let me act. If you want my life story, you better know the chapters I'm willing to read out loud." That line was instantly shared across social media and picked up by entertainment outlets as the definitive postscript to the incident. Meanwhile, Good Morning America continued with business as usual, but industry insiders noted that pre-interview agreements had become noticeably stricter in the aftermath. By then, the walk-off wasn't being framed as temperamental, it was seen as a carefully measured choice, perfectly in step with the persona Nicolas Cage had built over decades: bold, unpredictable, and absolutely unwilling to play a part he didn't choose. Asterisk. 6 months after Nicolas Cage's walk-off from Good Morning America, the moment had evolved from viral entertainment gossip into a lasting case study in media control and self-authorship. The footage of him calmly removing his mic, setting it on the table, and exiting without a backward glance had been clipped into countless TikToks, motivational reels, and even corporate training videos about boundary setting. Online, the phrase "Cage the interview" had emerged as shorthand for gracefully ending a conversation the second it veers into territory you've already marked as off-limits. Fans and fellow actors still reference the walk-off as proof that it's possible to shut down a moment without theatrics and act, that was somehow both cinematic and understated. Cage himself never cashed in on the drama, which only made the act more iconic. In the months that followed, he limited his promotional appearances to outlets he trusted, focusing on film festivals, niche podcasts, and in-depth profiles that celebrated his craft rather than his personal history. At one intimate screening in Austin, he was asked by an audience member what advice he'd give to younger actors about interviews. Cage smiled and said, "If you can't change the script, change the scene." That line exploded across social media, appearing on fan art, t-shirts, and quote boards. Meanwhile, Good Morning America subtly adjusted its tone in celebrity segments, sticking more closely to agreed-upon topics. By this point, the walk-off was no longer framed as a flare pit. It had become a symbol of an artist's right to decide how and when their story gets told. And a reminder that sometimes the strongest move you can make is to simply, silently leave. 7 months after Nicolas Cage's walk-off from Good Morning America, the moment had transformed from a piece of live TV tension into a full-fledged pop culture parable. In creative circles, pulling a Cage had become shorthand for exiting any conversation or situation that no longer served your purpose, whether in a film set meeting, a press junket, or even a personal relationship. The clip of Cage calmly unhooking his mic, setting it down, and walking away with that trademark unhurried stride was still circulating. Now often paired with captions like, "Leave the scene when it stops serving the story or boundaries," directed by Nicolas Cage. Fans marveled at how he had managed to turn what could have been a messy honor confrontation into a moment of pure, deliberate control. Cage himself leaned into the philosophy without overexposing it. At a Q&A during a film retrospective in Los Angeles, when an audience member joked about giving him the GMA treatment, Cage smirked and said, "The great thing about life is, you can always walk off your own set." The room erupted in applause, and the quote instantly went viral. Shared across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, as if it were a piece of screenwriting wisdom. Meanwhile, industry insiders noted that Good Morning America's booking team had shifted toward warmer, collaboration-focused segments for high-profile guest changes that many quietly attributed to the fallout from Cage's appearance. What remained clear was that the incident had outgrown its original context. It wasn't just a morning show walk-off. Anymore, it was an enduring reminder that in art, as in life, you can rewrite your role at any moment, even if that means stepping out of the frame entirely. Asterisk.